Villains! Everybody loves them. Sometimes they're hateable, sometimes they're sympathetic, other times they're just forces of nature. But within the medium of animation, these antagonistic figures can be portrayed as expressively as possible. Everybody knows Disney for their iconic villains like Ursula, Scar, Hades, Maleficent, and of course the GOAT, King Magnifico. But the House of Mouse isn't the only studio to have great villains. So many of the other awesome animation studios have an impressive pantheon of antagonists to accompany their filmographies, and so I wanted to shed some light on some characters that maybe didn't get the credit they deserved and build up the hype for the evil achievements of some other creative forces. I'm not including Pixar in this list because I feel like they're very rooted in Disney, and like if Merida from Brave can be considered a Disney princess despite coming from a Pixar movie, then you can definitely put Syndrome on a piece of merchandise with Captain Hook and nobody would bat an eye. But when the only criteria to be on this list is non-Disney, that really opened up some potential for some insane variety, considering how limitless of a medium animation is. I had a rough time narrowing this down to 10, so real quick I'd like to shout out some honorable mentions. First up is going to be Kingpin from Into the Spider-Verse. His design is raw as hell and he fills the screen with some extremely threatening presence, but he's also a really well-crafted character. The way he blames Spider-Man for his family leaving makes him sympathetic, and when he kills Peter Parker despite the apology he just received really underlines how much of a force he is to be reckoned with. I'm also going to mention Bowser from the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Jack Black really brought his A-game with bringing this character to life. His obsession with Peach makes for a great song, and his being number 2 turns to a hatred for Mario in a really funny and realistic way. He's also got an intimidating demeanor and one of the best character designs in Illumination's catalog. And lastly, I'm going to bring up Tank Evans from Surf's Up. He's not a villain in the same sense as a lot of these other characters, which is why he's only an honorable mention, but Tank is as antagonistic as you can get in a sports film. He serves as a good threat to Cody, as the surfer who dethroned his hero's championship title, and his obsession with the glory of victory is a nice contrast to Big Z's philosophy of emphasizing the importance of just having fun. Diedrich Bader poured a lot of charisma into his voice acting, and the bit with his trophies, ladies, is just hilarious. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get into the top 10.
And I always come to work with a smile.
When you ask people who their favorite Joker actor is, they're likely to say somebody like Heath Ledger, Mark Hamill, Jack Nicholson, or, well, probably less likely now, but Joaquin Phoenix. But one underrated performance that I think deserves to be just as beloved as the other clown princes of crime is Zach It's Not a Man Purse Galifianakis from the Lego Batman movie. I've seen Lego Batman a bajillion times since it came out, and Joker's just as funny now as he was 8 years ago. He's as evil as he can get away with for his medium, learning from not being taken seriously and using his tactics of manipulation and leadership to pose a genuine threat. But they never hold back on showcasing the emotionally vulnerable aspects of his character, considering all his actions come from a genuine affection for the rivalry he shares with Batman. I'm not like the typical Letterboxd user where romantic energy between two intentionally straight male characters is enough to make me like a movie more. But come on, the shipping dialogue between Batman and Joker is just as funny as it is comprehensive.
I like to fight around.
But even though Joker's only number 10, Lego Batman might hold my favorite hero-villain relationship on this entire list, since it really shows how yin and yang Batman and Joker are, considering how one can't exist without the other. The melancholy black and white montage of Batman walking around a crimeless Gotham listening to the Beatles after Joker turns himself in is a top 3 scene in the entire Lego franchise. And the whole "help me save Gotham so maybe we can save us" speech gives me the chills every time. Chris McKay and Warner Brothers could have so easily said, "Oh haha, funny Lego cash grab movie, we don't have to write Joker like an actual character," but instead, they went all in, fundamentally understanding everything that works about Batman and the Joker's relationship, both parodying it and celebrating it at the same time, and in doing so, they constructed a hilarious and extravagant personality who's definitely earned a spot on this list.
What's the matter? Lives flashing before your eyes?
For the last 14 years, Disney has brutally struggled with antagonists. And aside from the occasional King Candy or Taka, all their recent villains have been half-assed twists or just total jokes. But then DreamWorks comes along, puts out Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, where they crank out not one, not 2, but 3 perfect villains in one movie. I knew I had to include a villain from this movie on this list, but I had a rough time narrowing it down because they're all amazing in different ways. Jack Horner is simply a pure evil man-baby with no rational motivation or moral redemption, and the commitment to this allows for some fantastic humor. Goldilocks is a charismatic, morally gray, sympathetic character who provides a solid threat to Puss, and her arc and relationship with her bear family is enough to carry a whole spin-off film. But at the end of the day, my favorite villain from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish has gotta be Death. He commands the screen every time he's on it, with his low, ominous whistle, his raw design, and menacing aesthetic. Wagner Moura voices the character with such a slick and creepy tone, and in all his confrontations with Puss, I can't help feel the same fear that Puss does. This movie already had enough conflict, with the external threat of the other two villains and the inner turmoil of Puss contemplating the reality of being on his last life. But to embody that turmoil into a terrifyingly tall, anthropomorphic Grim Reaper wolf who was way too badass to emerge from the Shrek universe, and throwing him into a movie that already had two villains just made that threat and fear Puss grapples with through the whole runtime feel that much more real to me. The Last Wish has got to be the only movie in history that actually benefits from having more villains. It's one of the best animated movies of the 2020s thus far, and my favorite character from it is most definitely my homeboy Death.
I'm done saving you.
In the last 20 years, we've gotten a lot of prequel movies that feature two characters the audience is very familiar with, starting out as best friends and going to sworn enemies. A couple iconic examples of this being X-Men First Class and Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. But in my eyes, the betrayal plot point has never been more of an emotional gut punch than it is in Transformers 1. Because Minerbot D16, or as he's known by the end of the story, Megatron, is quite possibly the best version of this character. Aesthetically, he goes hard, with his design working as a faithful modernization of his G1 counterpart, and his massive laser cannon being incapable of looking more awesome. Brian Tyree Henry does such a good job evoking the broken and rageful emotions in his voice, and the "no more false prophets" speech he does to rally all the Decepticons is just chill-inducing. He has the most of an on-screen villain arc out of everyone on this list, since we actually see him spiral out of control in the moment he snaps from good to bad, and it's just a really emotionally compelling tale. D16 and Orion Pax start out as super close friends who are just goofing around and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and despite the fact that D's apprehensive towards taking a lot of these crazy risks, he still has faith in his government and this brother-like trust in Orion. But then the two of them get hit with this piece of information that changes everything they know about their world, and while Orion responds to this with an obligation to make things right, D's filled with nothing but rage and only wants vengeance against those who lied to him his entire life. We see this rage consume him farther and farther as the film progresses, and the moment when he finally descends into villainy is simply jaw-dropping. He has some brief inner conflict and remorse for pushing his best friend to the brink of death, but then the devil on his shoulder reminds him that Orion put himself in that position. D16 looks down, then he looks back up with red eyes, fully implying that there's no more D16 and only Megatron, in a moment of sheer artistic brilliance. Considering my familiarity with the Transformers franchise, the whole time I was watching 1, I knew Megatron was going to betray Optimus, but deep down, I still couldn't help but hope he'd redeem himself. And it's the emotional investment like that that's enough to make his evil actions pack even more of a punch.
See you back home, Spider-Man.
When I heard that the Spot was going to be the villain of Across the Spider-Verse, I didn't really know how to feel about it. Considering he's such a deep cut from Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, he wouldn't have been my top choice for someone to endanger the fate of the multiverse. But in hindsight, he's one of the most genius creations to come out of these Spider-Verse movies, and that's really saying a lot. Few characters on this list have more personality than the Spot. Jason Schwartzman put such wacky mannerisms into his voice performance that perfectly fit the absurdity of his design, and the fun antics he gets into during his fight with Miles are just hilarious. But he grows to be more and more of a threat over the course of the 2 movies he's been in, starting out as some random Alchemax scientist that Peter throws a bagel at, leveling up to being villain of the week, and then becoming this threatening, monstrous force of chaos that's prophesized to kill Miles' dad and endanger the entire multiverse. As an audience member, your view of him evolves as Miles' does. You shrug him off as being funny Dalmatian man at the beginning, only before you develop a genuine fear for him as Miles' nemesis. I can only say so much about the guy because he still has another movie of being awesome ahead of him, which probably won't come out till after GTA 6, so I don't know why I'm even getting my hopes up about it. But the Spot is undeniably amazing, and I can't wait to see more of him in the seemingly unlikely event Beyond the Spider-Verse comes out before the sun explodes.
I am a pig.
My love for the Angry Birds movie is not something to be toyed with, as it is my favorite video game adaptation of all time, and King Leonard Mudbeard is quite possibly the best character in that movie. Bill Hader just puts his heart and soul into making this guy as goofy as can be, and my goodness does it pay off. He just has one of those voices you instantly recognize, and no actor could have fit the role better than him. Scientists will tell you that you can't hear an image, but whenever I see a transparent PNG of this guy on the Angry Birds subreddit, I beg to differ. His delivery is awesome, making each and every line he's given 10 times funnier, and he's easily, by far, my most quoted character on this list. Then you add in the fact that he has all these cool gadgets, he does all these bizarre dance moves to fit the straight whack vibe of the Angry Birds universe. How could I not put him on this list? Yet, he's more than just funny, and when you move past the lens of this movie's characters being birds and pigs, Leonard's one of the most evil beings I could talk about in this video. He spoils himself off of the twisted aspirations of his dynasty and the technological sophistication of his society, becoming fat with greed and power. And he utilizes these resources to find a less advanced culture, betray their trust, and completely devastate their community. Not only does this man abduct an entire unborn generation, but he attempts to eat them, and comes pretty close while doing so. And the worst part? He thinks it's all hilarious. He inflicts so much sorrow and pain upon the innocents who are just minding their own business for a cause as unrighteous as wealthy goods, much like the European colonists he serves as a metaphoric representation of. And at the end of the day, it's this ego that he's had inflated beyond repair that causes his downfall. Red's able to distract and divert him by playing into his self-obsession, and it's that one slip-up from Leonard that causes his greatest foe to survive and his entire evil plan to go south. I think he justifies being this high on the list because he has that same surface-level, superficial entertainment value a lot of these other characters have. But then you dig beneath that, and he's actually really freaking twisted and embodies some of the darkest qualities of human nature in a very subtle way. So if that doesn't get you to bump up your Letterboxd score of the first Angry Birds movie by at least half a star, I don't know what will.
Finally, a worthy opponent. Our battle will be legendary!
The original Kung Fu Panda trilogy has some of the best villains not only in the history of animation, but cinema in general. And the one who got the ball rolling, my boy Tai Lung, couldn't have been a better antagonist to kick off this franchise. If every character on this list got into a fight, it's hard to imagine Tai Lung not finishing in at least the top 3, considering how impeccable of a kung fu master he is. The escape from Shorgam Prison is a top 3 fight scene of all time for me. The fact that Tai Lung hasn't moved in years, but he's still able to climb up a 3,000-foot cavern while taking out hundreds of guards and reflecting or dodging a total of 1,500 arrows just establishes how much of a threat he is when sent rampant on China. And the way he completely solos the Furious Five, some of the greatest fighters in all of ancient China, it's like every time I watch this, I still don't know how Poe's supposed to beat this guy. Ian McShane absolutely commands with his voice work, adding an almost Shakespearean edge to the Snow Leopard speech. Like the whole "it was you who filled my head with dreams" bit evokes feelings out of me I didn't even know I had. And he's one of those villains where if you were put through the same things he was, you could see yourself acting the same way. To be promised something as glorious as being the Dragon Warrior your whole life, only to have that denied from you by your surrogate father figure, then to be sent to prison for a number of years, and have that title given to someone who doesn't even know Kung Fu? Like, I get it, man. That sucks. Tai Lung just needs a hug. But his soul was broken by failed promises and misguidance to a point beyond repair or reconcile. And the growth and self-reflection it forces Shifu through serves as an amazing plot element. As we're getting this high into the list, the ranking is as loose as ever, and everybody has an equally solid shot at being number 1. So even if I have Tai Lung at number 5, Tai Lung is still a character I absolutely adore and one of my favorite villains in all of fiction.
They are not pajamas!
Quite possibly the most iconic villain on this list. Vector just rocks to no end. Jason Segel emphasized his line delivery to an exemplary degree that makes this character endlessly quotable. He's such a weird concept for a villain. He's a nerd in his 20s that leeches off of his dad being the boss of the Bank of Evil, so he has enough money and exposure to build these weird gadgets that typically involve the cannon launching of some sort of marine life. And his house looks like an orange leaf, not to mention the fact that he's always wearing pajamas. I'm sorry, a warm-up suit. But all this stuff adds up to creating a really funny and extremely memorable villain. I feel weird about ranking him this high since he doesn't have as much thematic substance as some of these other villains. But like, come on, it's freaking Vector, man. He commits crimes with both direction and magnitude. Oh yeah! I guess what he shows is while sometimes it's amazing to get a layered and complex antagonist, sometimes it's nice to just get a villain that's just so weird and funny they're impossible to forget. To hate Vector is to hate fun. This guy is a national treasure, a Gen Z icon, and single-handedly the best character to come out of Illumination's filmography.
A lifetime to plot his revenge, and he comes to me on his knees.
What?
There's no other villain on this list that scares the crap out of me now just as much as they did when I was 6, like Lord Shen from Kung Fu Panda 2. He ruthlessly solos 3 legendary Kung Fu masters in his opening scene. He deranges himself for 20 years over a soothsayer's prophecy, and he travels to insane and horrific lengths to prevent that from ever happening. The first 3 Kung Fu Panda villains, notice how I specified there, the first 3, are all awesome antagonists in their own way. But the reason I think that Shen is the best in the entire series is because unlike Tai Lung or Kai, who are both monsters from the past of Poe's mentors, Shen is the one who inflicted all this pain on Poe's life early on and permanently scarred him from that. This movie never holds back on showcasing the sheer tragedy held by Shen's genocide of the pandas. And decades later, he still thinks it's the right thing to do, while cackling at the opportunity to put an end to Poe only after forcing him away from his home. Gary Oldman is a high-profile actor who could have so easily phoned in his voice work for the peacock bad guy in the silly Jack Black Panda movie. But it's so amazing that he didn't. Shen only gets crazier and crazier as his story goes, descending to such levels of insanity where he's firing on his own soldiers and choosing to embrace death instead of self-redemption. Down to the detail, he's just got one of those designs that sticks with you, and his emphasis on weapons and strategy makes him a nice change-up from Tai Lung. He's an easy-to-hate, easy-to-remember villain that's one of the many 10 out of 10 elements to a simply perfect movie, so I can't imagine having him lower than the top 3.
Now my evil power will be unlimited. Can you feel me?
I can feel you.
Woo!
It's not personal. It's just business. And Lord Business is one of my favorite movie villains of all time. In terms of presence, this guy invented it. His height, flame helmet, and free use of the most powerful super weapon in the universe, which just so happens to be a bottle of crazy glue, makes him a force to be reckoned with for anyone who gets on his bad side. And Will Ferrell's voice fits so well for a funny but evil character. He has this satirical facade as a president and boss who claims to love his job and citizens, but at the end of the day, he's just a super capitalist who wants only to control people. One line of his that always stands out to me is when he tells Bad Cop's parents, "All I'm asking for is total perfection." Funny, sure, but it really shows how terrifying the inherent flaws of his ideology are. But quite possibly my favorite thing about the Lego movie is how the whole story is a metaphor for a father's issues with his son, and the son represents his father in his story with the villainous character who restricts imagination and free thinking. When the father notices that his son's bad guy is based on him, he realizes how restrictive he's been, and he asks his son what Emmett would say to Lord Business. So his son hits him with the same speech that the construction worker drops on the bad guy. The villain's humanity is appealed to in such a moving moment, and the way he goes in to hug Emmett in unison with the father hugging his son just makes it my favorite moment in all of cinema. This has been a tricky segment for me to write because there's a lot of things that make Lord Business fantastic. His evil, soul-crushing demeanor, his meta function for a deeper emotional undertone, his hilarious line delivery, the anti-establishment ideas that come from the heroes rebelling against him, and at the end of the day, he just sums up every possible thing that can make a villain awesome, while elevating an already phenomenal piece of media to being an unrivaled masterpiece. But there's still one villain that I think is a little bit better.
There shall be a great cry in all of Egypt, such as never has been or ever will be again.
If you've ever gotten a chance to see it, then you probably know that DreamWorks' The Prince of Egypt isn't a flick, or a movie, or even a film for that matter, but it's a gosh darn motion picture. The score by Afra Haza and Hans Zimmer is heart-swelling, the animation looks immaculate 25 years later, the musical numbers range from incredible to some of the best I've heard in my life, and it's such a beautifully devastating work of art that adapts the story of Exodus in such an accessible way that someone of any faith could enjoy it. But one of the brightest threads in this tapestry's grand design of amazing elements is the perfect villain, Ramses, played by Ray Fiennes. The film never relents on depicting how horrific all his actions were. He oppressed the Hebrew people in brutal slavery, overworking and starving them while never thinking of them as real people. And it's in his arrogance to the power of God that he ends up letting his innocent citizens suffer from these brutal plagues. But at the same time, they do something with his character that I didn't know was possible, by making a figure so unbelievably corrupt and hateable also sympathetic. It's not his fault that Ramses ended up being the way he did. Something about the contrast between him and Moses really shows that it's in the conditions an individual grows up that sculpts their worldviews. Ramses was born just as innocent as the people he oppressed, but it's because he was raised by this pharaoh who cautioned him against not being the weak link in the chain that breaks the dynasty. he convinced himself that what he was doing was right. And despite how evil he's consistently portrayed through the last 2 acts, you can't help but feel bad for the guy and all he endures at the wrath of God. To me, the fact that somebody can go from a reasonable enough person, somebody a good soul like Moses could consider a brother or best friend, to a cold-hearted tyrant that oppresses an entire people into despair while leading his into ruin is way more spine-chilling than any kind of mustache-twirling cartoon villain. While my lack of detailed familiarity with the actual Exodus story restrains me from elaborating on how accurate DreamWorks Ramses is to his biblical counterpart, I will still never be blown away by how a character so irredeemably evil, yet simultaneously profoundly human, can come from the same studio that made The Boss Baby. And it's the kind of character like this that I could never see any studio in Hollywood having the guts to pull off today. You fear him, you hate him, and you're heartbroken by his betrayal of Moses. But most of all, you feel for him. And that's why he comes in at number 1. I guess the main thing I wanted to do with this video was express how any animation studio is capable of creating an awesome villain. And I really wanted to show the limitless types of villains that can be tackled through such a boundless medium. Today, I talked about untamable forces of nature, sympathetic victims of harsh environments, pure psychos who are easy to root against, and some good old-fashioned goofy cartoon villains. But the 2 things that tied them together is that they're all evil and they're all awesome. But there's still a ton of awesome characters that just didn't make it onto my list or came from movies I'm yet to see. So that's why I'm encouraging you guys to let me know in the comments who your top 10 favorite non-Disney animated movie villains are. We'd love to hear other perspectives, so it would be awesome to get some of you in on the conversation. But that's gonna have to wrap it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications so you can be updated on when new videos are released. Until next time, YouTube, I will see you on the flip side.